2025 saw a massive adoption of AI in content production. We were overwhelmed by AI slop until in September, we saw a huge backlash. In December, the Wall Street Journal reported that brands like Vanta and Microsoft are hiring storytellers. Could this be a change in the way that brands are using AI in their content production? That's the topic that we're going to dive into today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up, the podcast for marketers working in early and late stage startups. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up. My name is Morgan McClintock, and today on the show, I am joined by Nicole Pytel. Hello, Nicole. How are you?
Hi, Morgan. I'm great. Thank you.
And Chris Ulbrich. Welcome.
Hi. Great to be here.
So, Nicole, we're going to talk about AI and content production because these are decisions that we have to make every day. How much should I use AI in the material that I'm producing, whether it's research or actually writing it or editing it? We've covered it on this show several times, but as I just said in the open there, large brands are hiring high-paid storytellers now, really to craft a bigger narrative. So, just to kick off, how would you summarize the use of AI in content marketing today?
Yeah, so the use of AI is from one end of the spectrum to the other. I've really hammered home on LinkedIn and in conversations with the Firebrand team, there's a huge, huge difference between being AI dependent and AI enhanced. And I think that's the spectrum. You've got a lot of content people who are AI dependent. They're using it to write from scratch. They're using it for everything, as opposed to those that are AI enhanced, where yes, it's part of the workflow. It's part of the creative process. It's part of the due diligence of, is this on brand? Is this cohesive? Things like that. But AI and content, they go hand in hand. They're always going to go hand in hand. The important thing is how you use it. And I think we're seeing with these head of storytelling roles, to me, it's a great title, but it's something that content marketers should have always been storytelling. We shouldn't have to be putting that emphasis on storytelling right now. I think it is in direct response to AI slop. But really, what are content marketers doing? A case study is a customer story. Emails are short stories that you're telling to people. Same with blogs, same with a tweet. They should all be telling a story that people actually want to consume, as opposed to just getting words or video or images just out onto the internet.
Yeah, there's a data point here that 90% of content marketers are using AI in some form, and I don't know what the other 10% are doing. And I have seen AI content become more pervasive. For example, I'm getting emails sent to me that are clearly written by AI, RFPs from companies looking for an agency that have been written by AI. And you can tell just from the sort of structure. And if you copy something from ChatGPT, it adds little sort of spaces sometimes. Like, it's really obvious. I think we're all dialing in a little bit more. And I feel like there's just a sort of an acceptance that stuff is going to be generated by AI. We do have to make a decision. Like, am I going to email someone a message that I've just copied and pasted it? Or am I going to get a brief that,
right,
if these are questions that ChatGPT wanted, did you want them?
Because when any mode of expression becomes ubiquitous, right, the deviation from it becomes a signal. And I think that perhaps, there was that Wall Street Journal article you referenced at the beginning of the episode, which suggested that brands were increasingly hiring for these prestigious, well-paid storytelling roles, suggests that storytelling, perhaps counterintuitively, is becoming even more important as the ability to create content becomes commodified. But in a way that you might seem counterintuitive, but in a way it makes perfect sense, because when the ability to write at a certain level becomes completely evenly distributed, the ability to do something more compelling with the writing, to structure the writing in a way, or to, if you are using AI, to instruct the AI to create a more compelling product, that is distinctive. And in order to do that, you need to have some idea what a good story looks like. I do think that increasingly we're seeing, whether it's out of backlash or just a desire to differentiate, we're seeing brands try to put some distance between what you might call the ChatGPT house style and the brand's style. And some people talk about going so far as to intentionally put grammatical errors in their copy because that communicates authenticity now. Like LLMs produce copy with a sort of varnished smoothness that is superficially pleasing, but over time it becomes dulling and mechanical.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned the mechanical part of it because, Morgan, you touched on 90% of content marketers are using AI tools. We've seen research come out from the Content Marketing Institute, and I can tell you 90% of content marketers are not seeing their performance metrics go up. Some of them are seeing it go down. A large number are just seeing it stay the same. So you're getting more out into market. But if it's not performing at the end of the day, if it's not doing what it needs to do for the business, it really doesn't matter how fast you make it or how you make it. You have to tell a better story. And a lot of that does come down to the prompt. You need an expert that understands, to Chris's point, what a good story looks like, what something compelling looks like. You can't just say, go write me a 500-word blog post on this. Ready? Go. It needs a lot of background information. And arguably for something like that, it can be faster to do it yourself, quite honestly. But I think what we need to get back to is, what is that content doing at the end of the day? Because we're not content creators, we're content marketers. And if marketing isn't having an effect on the business, what are we spending all of our time doing, whether it's on ChatGPT or not?
So yeah, we have to, let's say I'm writing a blog post, we have to make a decision about, I'm going to use AI, how much of the output should remain AI and how much of it needs to be human. Should I only use it for research? Should I make it do a rough draft? Should I write it myself and get it to check for the grammar? And maybe this varies by content archetype, right? Blog post, or I wouldn't do that for a press release. A byline. Okay, maybe. I think we always have to make a decision on every single deliverable about how much AI is acceptable and how much human is required to make it stand out. And that is really difficult because it's also changing. Like our audiences are accepting maybe more AI stuff than they were. How do you decide?
That is such a live question, I think. One of the things that I've been keeping an eye on in the media is the use of AI in op-eds for prestigious publications. I think to myself, how much gatekeeping are op-ed editors at the Wall Street Journal doing? And I have been, frankly, shocked at the amount of purely AI written content that they are clearly letting through. I mean, look, what are my tools for determining whether something is AI written? Number one, if you are anyone who pays attention or has written with AI over for a certain amount of time, you start to notice the tells. ChatGPT likes the idea of phenomena shifting from one thing to another. The word quietly shows up out of nowhere in a lot of its copy. Famously, there's the construction, it's not just this, it's that, or it's not so much this, it's that. And then I have a few AI detectors, which I know are notoriously unreliable, but I have a few of them. I've tested them on my own writing. I feel like I have a pretty good read on what they catch and what they don't catch, and where they are good at detecting properly AI written stuff. And at least one of them is hypersensitive. Anyway, the sum is that in a lot of cases, when I run a Wall Street Journal op-ed or an op-ed from The Hill political publication through all of my brain detector and my software detectors, it pretty much confirms my suspicions. And I can think of one Wall Street Journal op-ed that was written by a couple of research scientists. And you could really see what happened because they wrote the intro and they wrote the paragraph which described their findings. And then everything from there on out until the conclusion, like the body of the op-ed was AI generated. Everything that discussed context and larger significance, they left that to the AI to write. I'm not saying they didn't give it any guidance, but the copy was conspicuously AI generated. And that ran in the Wall Street Journal. And I saw an op-ed that would have been in the Hill that would have been embarrassingly conspicuous as a LinkedIn post. So when we think about, to Nicole's point, we are marketers. The point is to be creative with effect. But one of the things that we have to grapple with is that the editors that we are trying to please with our content in order to get our clients' work accepted seem to be increasingly happy to accept AI generated content, which raises the question for us, what benefit are we providing for the client if we insist on doing it all ourselves? Look, at heart, I'm a purist. I would prefer everything be generated out of the human mind. But I do recognize that in the business world, you have to balance the factors like time to value and speed of production, and those things have a real economic value that goes into the calculation about how much you're willing to spend on your content program, how much value you're getting out of your content program. It would be unrealistic of me to be a hardliner and not even consider the possibility that it does make sense in some cases to generate from AI.
Yeah.
Again, I will tell you, it's not, I come from a humanities background. It's not my preference. It doesn't sit right with me, but it does feel like the way the world is moving.
That surprises me, though, because OpenAI itself is hiring for a content marketer. They actually, presumably, if anyone can churn out a lot of content, if you own ChatGPT, it's you. And it feels if publications like the Wall Street Journal are publishing AI stuff, that feels like a race to the bottom. If anyone's going to hold the bastion and hold the line, it feels like it's them. And that feels like a race to the bottom of just publishing the slop after a while. And yet, I know I've seen reporters worry about the quotes that are submitted to them as sources. Hey, I need a quote about trends in DevOps or what have you. They've got a question. They really don't want ChatGPT's views. They want a human's views. And so I would tend to think, I'm a bit surprised about these bylines because at the capillary level with reporters being very concerned about email, and in fact, to going to the extent that some of them are like, I will only talk to sources because I want to see them say the words and I'm going to use those and not an emailed submission just to avoid this problem entirely.
Yeah. And I think what that points up is the difference between the types of content that have different goals. And so, for instance, I think it would be a bad idea to outsource a quote to an AI.
Yeah.
What AI gives you is copy that is good enough. And in an organization that doesn't have really competent writers, AI can raise the level, the general level, instantly.
Yep.
In an organization where the writers are more competent than the AI, what AI can do is deliver content faster than those people can, but without personality. And then you have to ask, when does the personality matter? When does the distinctiveness matter? For what types of content? So that Wall Street Journal op-ed I'm describing, no one, I think, was really looking for that op-ed to deliver memorable lines. It is an opinion piece, but it's basically a vehicle to deliver research and observations on the research into the readership's bloodstream. But if you are trying to create a piece of content, like some thought leadership content, where you want to create a snappy soundbite, or you want to express the personality of your spokesperson, you can't really leave that to an AI. Certainly not at this point. Maybe someday, like, AIs are getting better at imitating people's voices, certainly at imitating people's faces. Maybe eventually they'll get really good at imitating someone's tone, but I don't find that to be true right now. I wouldn't outsource a CEO quote, for instance, to an AI. That's not copy that, to my mind, can ever just be quote unquote good enough, because the whole point of it is that it expresses the individuality of the spokesperson.
Yeah. And I think that's where the strategy comes in. I think a lot of marketers are using AI, but without a strategy. And so you have to be very strategic about when and how you use AI. So I'll give you an example. Last night, I made Italian chicken for dinner, baked it in the oven, didn't have time to make marinara sauce from scratch, used some bottled sauce. It was fine. It was good enough. If I had taken the time, though, to make the marinara sauce, and then instead of sticking the raw chicken in the oven, I stuck it in the microwave and it tasted like an old shoe when it came out, even the best marinara sauce wouldn't have made it any good. So you have to know where to be more efficient and where quality really matters. And I think it does take a marketing expert to know that, because to your point, Chris, you're a PR expert. You know where humanity needs to shine through. Arguably, it needs to shine through in everything, but you have that standard of, I will never use AI to create a quote because that is just an innately human thing. That's the part of it. That's where marketers get it wrong, being AI dependent instead of AI enhanced. You have to have a strategy of when and how you're going to use it.
And I think that in a way, the seductive, tricky, and maybe even treacherous side of that is that AI, in some ways, expresses a sort of mid-level best practice about about everything, but how to write included. And a lot of the time, what the AI comes up with, you look at it and you say like, oh, okay, yeah, that's pretty snappy. I hadn't thought about, not bad. Well done. If a teammate had brought that to me, I'd have said, nice work. But what you don't realize is, and especially until you immerse yourself in AI writing, that what you're seeing is a trope that the AI uses over and over again. And maybe now, maybe a year ago, those tropes are still hitting, but pretty soon everyone's going to be onto them. Everyone's going to catch its little trick, and it's going to be recognizable, and it's going to turn people off. There were articles some months ago about the young people yelling at AI generated content on social media, calling it shut up clanker. They had a term for it. And that brings us back to the earlier point we were making, which is that in a world where everyone can express themselves with a certain base level competence and they all sound the same, just differentiating your voice is a signal to the market that you care about branding, that you care about humanity, voice, individuality. For certain brands, that could be really powerful, and it can be worth the investment. That's the balance you've got to strike. Right. What AI gives you is base competence at an incredibly low price, but that is not always going to accomplish the goals you have for your brand.
We've actually seen data that shows that the majority of B2B buyers think all these brands sound the same. Even on their best day, everything is blending together. So what do you think you're going to get if everybody's plugging everything into AI and those same tropes are popping up over and over and over again? You're not going to stand out. You're not going to have that uniquely human experience, and you're just going to blend into the woodwork.
So it comes down to judgment, like so much of marketing, knowing how much to use AI for what kinds of content. And sometimes it's expedient to just get the thing published using AI. But remembering that your audience, once they find out, once they dial into those tropes that Chris was just talking about, then their trust will be eroded, because as soon as people click that it's been written by a clanker, their trust goes. And so you've got to be very careful with your brand there if they're reading the article. And as we've said before, you didn't take the time to write it. I'm not going to take the time to read it and trust you. And once that's gone, you don't get it back.
A great example of this that you just made me think of, I was looking into a newsletter. It's an email newsletter, and it publishes material that's really relevant to one of our clients. And it zeroes in on this content about SaaS pricing in a way that very few, it goes into the subject with a depth and sophistication that very few sources do. And so we were thinking, oh, maybe we ought to reach out to the publisher of that newsletter. And so I did a little more research. I was looking at their about page and their partnership page. And not only as I looked into the newsletter was it increasingly clear, but the newsletter itself was generated by AI. And it was one of 8 to 10 newsletters of category, or
Okay,
like in
is it?
roughly different categories. And I thought, okay, that's fine. And they found a way to surface valuable information efficiently. And look, as long as it's real, it's useful to me. But when your Partner With Us page is written by AI, that gives me pause, because I don't really have faith that the experience I have working with you is going to be tailored to me. And I expect the whole thing. It's like when websites stop publishing a phone number, right? Or even an address, right? Or companies, SaaS companies, if you go to their about page, increasingly they'll say like the cities where they have an office, but everyone's working remote. So there is no address, there is no phone. And the only way to reach them is through, say, a web form. And how do you feel when you encounter one of those contact us web forms? When I see that, I have very low confidence I'm going to get a reply. And that's the feeling I get from an AI generated contact us page, about us page. It turns out that it is, at least for me, it's important for a brand I'm interacting with to be expressing itself in a way that I recognize as human, even if the material they provide me is, the service they provide me is AI generated.
Let me flip it on its head. How do you feel that human written content has changed as a result of us consuming all of this AI content? It's very structured. It has bullet points. It has a certain meter to it. Any technology changes the way that people communicate. Text messages have changed the way that people spell and emojis, etc. It would be naive to think that consuming all this AI-generated content isn't going to have the same kind of effect. What we expect, and our attention spans are going down anyway as a result of consuming tweets and TikTok. Content formats are getting shorter. Do you think it's changing the way that you write or that humans are writing, or is that wrong?
Yes, I see so many people on LinkedIn just having anxiety about using an M-dash. And I've been using M-dashes for a long time. I am not going to stop using them. If you look at my writing, you will most definitely see an M-dash somewhere. It is not ChatGPT. It is me. That is what I do. I think it's made some content marketers a little bit paranoid. Although I've also spoken with other content marketers that are like, the M-dash, I'm taking it to the grave. Like, I'm not letting it go. All right. And I think when you have marketers that are worried about being seen as AI when it's really them, it changes things. In terms of the structure that you mentioned, Morgan, the bullet points and the things like that, that structure I learned many moons ago, many more years ago than I like to think about, long before AI, just because to your point, people don't have an attention span. They're not going to come onto a web page and read every single word. They're going to scan it, see if it's worth their time to read a little bit more, and dive into it from there. And I think we've all been on that page where you see this giant block of text and just, you go, that looks hard. That looks hard to consume. Forget it. Like, I'm not reading it. In journalism school, they taught us to write as if your audience is in the next room cooking dinner or trying to wrangle the kids and they're half listening to the newscast. And our attention spans have gotten shorter since then. So it's definitely changing things. And I hate when people say, oh, bullet points are from ChatGPT or white spaces from ChatGPT, when those have been best practices in content marketing for a long time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think declining attention spans have been shaping the way, especially brands, for a long time, even before the advent of AI. I think AI has accelerated that tendency or that trend toward content that is bite-sized and conspicuously set off by visual elements like bullets. It is also, to be frank, easier to produce because the writer doesn't have to sustain an argument for much longer than a paragraph. So there's a certain psychological security if you're writing, knowing that once you get past the introduction, if you have an idea of the points you want to make, you can express each of those points as a separate bullet, write a paragraph and be on. And it does, from a practical standpoint, accelerate content production because the writer is not thinking in terms of a sort of a continuous 800 word or 1,000 word argument. They're just thinking in small blocks. And AI is the perfect assistant to help create content that looks like that. But as I say, I think this trend has been a long time coming. Blogs accelerated it, just the blog format itself, which made publishing much less formal. It made people more accepting of very short pieces of content, which paved the way for micro content like a tweet. But now we are all living in a world where we have to assume attention spans are shorter than they've ever been. They were already pretty short. It's funny, I was just reading yesterday that about some interview Matt Damon did where he was saying that Netflix wants movies, screenplays, to repeat key plot points 3 times in dialogue because they want the material to be comprehensible to people who are distracted on their phones. They assume people watching Netflix are also absorbing content on Instagram, and they'll literally lose the plot if characters in your favorite Netflix drama don't reiterate what's going on repeatedly. And so if you've ever had that experience wondering why is there so much exposition in this series, there you have it.
Yeah, you definitely see that if you're actually following along and there's suddenly there's a scene where they all stop and then just explain what happened. And you're sitting there thinking, wait, I just watched that. We know what's happened. But of course, and also because they're expecting people to turn it off at a certain point and then turn it back on and continue watching, they're going to bring people back up to, wait, what was happening with this again? That makes perfect sense. As we're thinking about, all right, I need to make my writing authentic. I do think that there are decisions to be made, about how many M dashes to use. I have pause about using them when I'm okay. So it does change the way you write, I think. If you want it to be authentic, is there anything that you can do to really stand out from the AI slop?
Yeah. Use your brain. What do you think? The AI is trained on stuff that already exists. If you genuinely have a point of view on something, there's probably not a ton of other articles or whatever out there for the AI to be trained on. If you have a really unique idea, or if you really are a thought leader, we talk a lot about thought leadership. That involves leading thoughts, not just thoughts that everybody else has. And that's the point where you have to say, okay, AI, I might come to you to help polish this, but I can't tell you how many times I've had a thought or a point of view or something that I'm trying to get across, whether it's a LinkedIn post, a blog post for Firebrand, something. And it's my idea, and I put it in a really long format that's a very rough draft of it and say to ChatGPT, this is what I'm thinking. Can you help me put this into a format or make this a little bit more concise so it's a little bit more digestible? But the thoughts and the point of view are all mine. And I think that's where authenticity starts, is you've got to close out ChatGPT and really truly think. And if you're an expert in what you do, that shouldn't be hard. It should not be hard to sit there and go, hey, when I think about everything that's going on in my industry right now, or when I think about what my competitors are doing, or when I think about what makes us different than the competition, you're going to have a unique, authentic thought that has the ability to be scroll stopping if it's communicated in the right way. And if AI helps you get to that finished product, great. But it has to start with you.
I really like that. I really like what you're saying there. I think I would put it just a little bit differently, though, and feel free to argue with me about this. When you said it shouldn't be hard because you're an expert, I think the basic idea there is, you can have faith that this is doable because you're an expert. You, in a weird way, I think it is actually the experience of struggle that we risk losing in an AI facilitated world. And it is out of that, like writing well is hard. No one has ever, writing is not notoriously an effortless process. Like the phenomenon of writer's block is real. And I wonder if the message is not expect this to be easy, but in a way, the fact that it's hard shows that you're on the right track. And you can have, because it is out of that grappling with all the different ideas in your head and all of your experience and really thinking it through, that something original emerges. And it is a process. But what I would tell a client is, I have faith that out of that process, something good is going to come out because I know that you are an expert. I have experienced the benefits of your expertise. I've seen you say original, interesting things before. I know it's in there. And what I worry about with AI is that we're all going to lose the habit of going through the process because AI is always there tempting you with a quick answer, a quick out. And I think it's going to take a sort of conscious choice to resist that siren's call, because otherwise, and I feel it, to be clear, I feel it. And I would tell a spokesperson that I'm working with, give yourself 15 minutes of quiet time to think this through. And I guarantee you what you come up with is going to be better than what comes out of ChatGPT.
And the opposite is also true again, because I've seen, because in this instance, you're saying 80% of the work is being done by the human and 20% by AI to get it over the line because they've paid the price of the thought. But the opposite is also true, that I've seen bylines or ebooks or content assets that have been generated largely by AI, the 20%, the quick bit. Here it is. Just top and tail this thing. I've done most of it. You can just finish it off. But when you get into it, actually, the price has not been paid and those thoughts are not actually in there. And the 80% remains to be done. And I think that can create a sort of false ease of, oh, this byline is actually really true. Because I'd already done 80% of it. But actually, you really hadn't, and there aren't many thoughts in here, and most of it's padding, and it's not in the right structure, and these data points, this is not backed up by data. And actually, if you look at the data, it doesn't support this argument. And so actually, I've got to go all the way back and start over, which is work that we feel that we have to do, but the client might feel like they've done. So I think this struggle and paying the price is really important because the 20-80%, the 20-80 rule is also true in this situation. So listen, thank you, Nicole, Chris. This is a live topic. I think every day marketers are making these decisions. As I said, it's a judgment call. That line is changing. That's why we wanted to revisit this topic as we go into 2026. I'm sure it's one that we're going to revisit again because it's absolutely fundamental to content marketing, to PR, and just to the overall brand. Chris, Nicole, thanks for your time. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all again this time next week.